Hey, it's Michael, and welcome to another podcast episode. Before I get into today's episode, we wanted to make an offer to you. If you go to firmsconsulting.com, you will see a pop-up or you will see a place to add in your email address, or you can register on the Firms Consulting website. If you register onto that website, you get put into an exclusive list. And what you get in that exclusive list is samples of the content we have available to FC insiders. For example, you could get a sample episode of Competitive Strategy with Kevin Coyne. Kevin Coyne is an ex-McKinsey partner, former worldwide head of strategy, and he had served something like over 25 CEOs on a personal level on a one-to-one basis over his career. Kevin also has a program called How to Become a McKinsey Partner. It's the first time ever a McKinsey partner has gone on record talking about what is actually required to become a partner, and you'll find it's very different from what you think is required. How to Develop Deep Insights, which I have put together, one of our most popular programs, the Electric Car Startup. You will get sample episodes of all of those programs and more if you sign up to this list. So, that said, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hi everyone, and welcome to another Strategy Skills podcast. I believe we've just passed the 100th anniversary episode, so it's a very big milestone. And I wanted to thank everyone who listens to this podcast series, because it's because of you that we've been able to go so far. In today's episode, it's going to be pretty interesting because we are going to talk about the best practices in operating in a digital economy, in a digital age, and looking at what the leading companies have done to be successful in making that transition from analog to digital. And I'm going to be interviewing Peter Dahlstrom, who is a senior partner at McKinsey & Company. He leads McKinsey's client and firms communication, and he's the global leader for McKinsey Digital's business-to-consumer team. And I think he's done work in quite a few sectors, including telecommunications, high-tech, media, and so on. And he's wrote a book called In Fast Times, whereby McKinsey has summarized some of the best practices in terms of how to be a leading edge company in the digital economy. He's written the book with 3 other McKinsey partners. So the bottom line is that the partners who wrote the book have a good reputation and a track record of doing interesting and innovative work in the digital space. I don't want to say too much about what we'll discuss, but I think one of the things that's nice about the book and the discussion I'm going to have with Peter about his work and career in general is that the book isn't very technical. It summarizes and highlights some of the key principles. I think it's very accessible, can be read by anyone. I enjoyed reading it. And the conversation with Peter is going to delve into not just the book, but some of the challenges he's helped executives overcome in thinking through how to make the transition. I liked some of the ways McKinsey, and particularly the authors, have framed or reframed some topics. I like the focus on the soft skills, which I think is generally lost when you talk about digital, coding, apps, back-end, front-end, and so on. Because at the end of the day, if you, as Peter says, a graveyard for the careers of digital stars, you're not going to attract the best people, and you're never going to succeed. But I'm not going to tell you what he's going to say, because in a few seconds, he's going to do it for you. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome, Peter. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much, Michael. How are you?
I'm fantastic. So you're calling in from London, where it's, I'm guessing, very cold, and I'm calling in from Los Angeles, where it's very warm. A contrast.
It's freezing and it's raining and it's dark.
It's freezing and it's raining and it's dark. So that's a summary of both the British economy and the weather.
Mostly the weather these days.
Okay, good. So I know you're very busy, and I wanted to thank you for being on the call. I think our listeners are really going to enjoy it. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's begin, right? So you've been working in the digital, I want to say sector, but it's probably a function is a better word for it at McKinsey. Mm-hmm. And you've been doing some interesting work. So I've read some of the stuff you've put out, particularly the book on digital transformation and the digital economy called Fast Times. Mm-hmm. Let's start with some of the things that jumped out. I'm going to start in no particular order, just the things I found interesting, right?
Sure.
When I was reading the book, I thought a better name for the book would have been A Graveyard for Digital Stars. It's one of the chapters you have. And I was skimming through the book to find out where to start reading. I thought, wow, this must be the most captivating title I've ever heard before. So let's begin there, right? Because whenever you talk about the digital economy, digital superstars, companies that are capturing the bulk of the pie in e-commerce and digital, it's almost as if there's a huge focus on technology, software, coding. But when I read the book, there was a very big emphasis on the soft side of things. So let's start with this idea of how do you attract these individuals who can reposition your business to thrive in this new economy? What are the principles for that?
Yeah, no, so I think you captured maybe the essence of what it takes to drive these digital transformations. At least one of the really important factors. And the slightly counterintuitive thing is when people think about digital transformations, you do exactly think about what you describe as IT architectures, software stacks, delayering, and all of these sorts of things. And I mean, the much more important factor is actually softer in nature. And things like attracting the right talent, redesigning organization operating models, addressing cultural change, those are the things that really sort of pop up as much more important. To your question about how do you attract, these superstar talents, it's really not easy because typically, whether you take a telecom company, an insurance company, a bank, these talents don't sit in these companies and are not particularly attracted to join them either. So it's really not easy to get to them. And the way to do it is through a combination of, and this is the hard part, reskilling and upskilling existing staff and attracting people from the outside. When you speak to executives who have successfully transformed their organization, they would say that 75, 80, 85% of the people need to come from inside.
Wow.
Many of the large companies, they've got thousands of people, tens of thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands of people, and you simply can't replace, certainly not all of them, not even like large portions of them. So reskilling and upskilling is a really important part. And you've got some examples of companies that have done that really well. AT&T, Walmart, they just run reskilling programs at scale. So that's a really important part of it. But it's not the only thing. Actually attracting the talent or some talent from the outside is critical as well. And it's not the large numbers of people. It's finding, the first 15, 20, 25, 30 people from the outside and bring them in-house. And that requires just quite different recruiting techniques than people are used to. So in McKinsey, we have 30,000 people inside our firm. We've hired 5,500, 6,000 digital and analytics people from the outside, and we had to fundamentally change the way we recruited. So we had to go to different sources. We needed to find a couple of people to bring in-house like superstar, world-class talent. And these people then, through their social networks, attracted more people. So I think finding the first 15, 20, 25 people that are the, digital superstars is absolutely critical. And they then attract, others to their networks. And it becomes like magnets for further talent. So that's the way, the best companies are doing it, the combination of bringing people in-house and reskilling, upskilling people. And that actually requires quite different recruiting approaches.
Okay, so I'm going to unpack what you said because I think it's quite important. Mm-hmm. So let's look at the European economy, for example, where I'm going to hazard that the labor rules are a lot stricter with unions having a lot more say, at least in places like Germany and so on. So you can't just replace 10,000 people, even if you wanted to, right?
Yeah.
You have to, work with your current employees, bring them up to the level of skill needed to compete in the digital economy. And if I hear you correctly, you've got to seed that organization with a number of key people that can catalyze that change.
Yes.
And you've got to find out what roles to bring them in. And they've got to almost play the role of a change maker, whereby they're leading an organization through a transformation to compete digitally. So if I'm hearing you correct, and correct me if I'm wrong here, when you hire these few people, they've got to take on the role of changing the organization. Is that correct?
Yes, so an important part of it. I mean, they can't do it alone. I mean, if you hire, a couple of handfuls of really good engineers or programmers, they can't change the organization on their own. But they're really important part of it. And another thing you describe is the challenge of replacing people. And what we're actually seeing is that in many instances, people are actually increasing the number of staff.
Okay.
So many of the large corporations, again across multiple industries, take telcos, banks, insurance companies. Many of these companies, although quite technology centric, because they don't have physical products, they actually sell services, so they're therefore very IT centric. They've outsourced and offshored large parts of the engineering resource. And the system integrator companies, they have, take whoever you want to name. They have like hundreds of thousands of people sitting in all kinds of different places around the world. And the truth is, when you become a more digitally savvy company, you just need to move some of these people back in-house.
Yes.
Not all of them. But
this is about knowing what to outsource and what to keep inside.
Exactly. So you look at your software stack. You will have some backbone. You will have API, open API level microservice on the top, and the microservices which allow you to drive differentiation to your competitors. Some of these microservices you do want to develop in-house. And when you develop them in-house, you want to develop them with your own people.
Yes.
And these people, they work, in cross-functional teams with your marketing people, with your sales people. And if they're outsourced and offshored, it's just completely, it's the wrong way of working. So you bring them back in-house, you create these cross-functional teams, and you make these cross-functional teams develop the parts of the software which differentiates you compared to your competitors. So in many cases, actually the number of engineering resources in-house actually increases rather than falls.
Okay, so there's two interesting things here you raised. I'm going to explore them both. So if I was the CEO of a major outsourcing company, this is an opportunity for me to go to companies like Volkswagen, Total, Air France, and say, because of the fact you're going digital, the things you're going to outsource may change, and we can help with that.
Yeah. So that is what they're doing. But the truth is also that more and more companies, I think, will just outsource less and offshore less. Or
at least what is being offshored would change.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree with that. It changes, but the most critical parts of your software stack, I think you do want to control. You do want to have the people develop that in-house. You do want to have that onshore and sit on your own premises.
So in a manner of speaking, the things that companies considered non-core commoditized functions that they competed on cost, it flips the script.
Yes.
And they now need to think about how they can bring it. For example, if a company had offshored all of its analytics function to India or the Philippines and didn't really care about it, just signed SLAs on a cost-plus basis, those executives need to rethink about how to bring those back inside the business and find a way to create a competitive advantage there.
That's exactly it.
So it's quite a fundamental shift for companies, because it's not just going digital. It's about changing the way you manage suppliers. It's about deciding what your core business is going to be. It's about changing the way you recruit it. It's not going to happen at once, but it's a number of discussions and a series of changes.
That's correct. No, that's exactly it. And that's why this is not easy, right? Because it's like your whole organization operating model changes. It's like from being organized like many businesses are by function or in business units, suddenly, and having, large groups of people, outside your company, what you actually have in the company and out of the company changes, and how you're organized inside the company changes.
Yes.
Right? So in many cases, it's like the traditional organizational structures and processes don't work as well anymore. So it is a huge shift.
And as companies go digital, they have to do it in different ways, because each of them will have different competitive advantages that they need to emphasize. And I think an example of that, I would think, is competing in artificial intelligence, where you need a lot of data. And you need to be able to suck in a lot of data and analyze it and so on. So companies that have this ability to mine or have access to the data will have an advantage, and that's an area they can develop versus another company who wants to go digital and may not have that advantage, right?
I agree.
So when executives are listening to this, it's not as if everyone's going to go digital in the same way. It's going to be a different pace and in different areas of emphasis.
Agree. So if I give you maybe a couple of examples of types of digital transformations, which are quite different in nature. So I just pick a couple of my own clients that I have worked with, I'm currently working with. So one of the first companies I served that was really, really exposed at pace, to the digital economy was a media company. It was basically a newspaper and magazine company. And newspapers and magazines are very easily read online. So they basically saw their business, disappearing. So what they did is, like I said, I just can't transform my newsroom quickly enough from being like a physical newsroom and just now printing physical newspapers and magazines. I just can't do it fast enough. It's like to stem the revenue decline. But what I can do is because I've got so much insight into how consumers or users use the internet. I see this earlier than anybody else, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy 15, 20, 25, 30 different companies based on the cash I'm generating today, and just create a portfolio of companies which is much, much more digitally exposed than my core business. That's one way to transform, where it's just changing so fast, so you just can't quickly enough transform your core business. So it's an M&A based, joint venture based, way of transforming. If I take a second company, which I served a little bit later. So this was a fast food company. They make pizza and other fast food type things, and their business was heavily exposed to digital at the time when we started working together. So they had 60-70% of the business, was sold online. If you take pizza, for example, I mean, in some markets, in some Western European markets, 50-67% of pizza sold online, and they had outsourced the platform and the management of the platform to somebody else. They said, this is now my core business. Making the pizza itself is really interesting, but this is now very much the core of my business. It's the majority of my revenues. So I need to own and control that. So what they did is said, I want the best online experience across all categories for the way I market and sell and service my pizza customers.
Perfect.
So they created the best, digital platform almost across all categories because that became their core, and a platform which I could then expand beyond pizza into all kinds of other fast food and other food types of businesses. So that was the way they transformed, which was a platform-based play, very much online and e-commerce based. And then the last one maybe is a telco. Telco has been a very difficult sector in the last 6, 7, 8 years. Probably one of the most value destructive, industry sectors, at least in Europe, of almost any sector in any geography in the history of mankind. If you take the last 7, 8 years, this cash contribution from the industry has fallen about 20-25% over the last 7, 8 years. So it's really been a very, very tough environment. For telco, it's about cost reduction. So they need to cut costs faster than the revenue line declines. And, they set out to say, I need to cut costs in my call centers, for example, by 50%. So it's a very functionally focused effort to just slash costs and move more and more of their customers onto e-commerce platforms and apps to not have to serve them through the call centers and just cutting costs in specific areas of business. So 3 archetypes, they're quite different based on where the company was, based on how quickly the industry moved. And most companies will need to find some combination of these different archetypes as they digitize.
Well, I think that's the difficult part, right? Because you need to figure out, if you're whatever entity you are, how to change. But I think the harder thing is knowing what good looks like. I mean, what are you trying to become? Because the media tends to be biased towards a few companies, and they play them up as being the only examples of how to be digital. And there's always a danger that an executive gets caught into that echo chamber. But each company has to migrate at its own pace with its own strategy. Yeah, does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And I wish that more executives would think like you, because I think that's exactly it. You can't copy, a Google or a Facebook or an Amazon, right? You need to start with the assets that you've got. And many of the older incumbent companies, they've got great brands. They've got a great number of people and staff working for them. They've got great offerings. They've got heritage. And you need to use what you've got and create your own way to differentiate yourself based on the assets and capabilities you've got. So you can't copy others.
And there are nuances, right? For example, Netflix is very, very, I don't want to say famous, I would say well known for the fact that they have these algorithms which recommend shows for you to watch. But so Netflix is competing on this ability to fine-tune the way it recommends things to viewers. But at the same time, Netflix hosts its entire platform on Amazon AWS. So it hasn't brought it in-house, but it's built a very sophisticated capability, even though it outsources the movement of its data. So what I'm trying to say is it's what you are saying. Because if you just listen to what we're saying, where you have to bring in analytics in-house, maybe, but you need to think about what is the best thing for you.
Yes.
You can't just...
No, I agree.
You can't just copy Netflix, because I was speaking to someone else the other day about Amazon Prime, Amazon in general, about how good they are about using artificial intelligence and understanding what customers need and using artificial intelligence to build capabilities that customers need. But I mean, Amazon has a unique advantage because they sit on so much data. A smaller e-commerce company, maybe regionally focused in, let's say, Belgium, has to digitize itself in a very different way, emphasizing very different strengths. So it can't just read a book about Amazon and say that's what we're going to do, because that's Amazon's strategy, not the Belgian company's strategy.
Yeah.
So I want to switch gears a little bit. Yeah. I want to switch gears.
I agree with you most. Yeah, I agree with you mostly. I think I'm actually thinking about it myself as you speak.
British humor.
So I guess some areas where I think you will have a stronger tendency to outsource and not own and control it yourself. So data centers, that is a scale game. Very capital intensive. And how to build large data centers. I mean, AWS, Azure. I mean, you just don't want to compete with them ever, whether you're Netflix or anybody else. I mean, even if you're a large telco, they will struggle to build their own data centers. So I think there's some parts of the business where the bar is just really, really high to ever compete with anybody. Right? It's like you may just be better off. It's very difficult to differentiate yourself based on a better data center. I think the other extreme is the data itself. So while you may outsource the platform on which the data sits, right? So the access to the data and the algorithms. I mean, you may get some advice also sort of how to write the algorithms. But you do want to own and control the most important data and the way you crunch the data, I think.
No, I agree. It's different for different companies. But I think what you're saying is that each company is going to be at a different stage in its level of maturity of knowing what to do with the data. Some are going to be very sophisticated. Like I think Netflix probably is. They outsource all of the number crunching, but they're really good at knowing what to do with the data. Well, other companies are so young at figuring out what to do with data that just getting it outsourced is going to be a big progressive step for them. And then over time, they have to figure out, okay, now we've outsourced it. The outsourcing is working fine. Everything's done. We've paid off that cost. What do we do with the data that we're getting from our outsourced operations? They have to mature up to that level. Is that a good way of looking at it?
It's one way to look at it. I mean, so I really feel strongly about most companies, at least over time. Should have an aspiration to own the data and so to execute campaigns and other activities based on their data. Because I mean, giving that up and hoping to win, I think will honestly be difficult. I think, that said, you are making a good point. I mean, in some cases, some companies, smaller ones or otherwise, companies a bit behind, they need help, right? But I would structure the help in a way that I can get it back. I wouldn't sell it off. I wouldn't structure agreements where I will struggle to build the capabilities myself. So I build, operate, and transfer type concept where somebody helps me build it, maybe even helps me operate it, for a period of time, but then transfers it back to me. So I own and control my own data, my own algorithms, and I build the capabilities. I think, if I really want to win in a segment of a sector, I think that's the way I would think about it.
I think I'm agreeing with you 100% here, because the end goal, no matter what you're doing and where you are in terms of how skilled you are at managing data and so on, you have to eventually be trying to get to controlling data. But I think the term we're trying to talk about here is the last mile, right? It's about how we use that data to make that final connection with consumers and customers.
Correct.
And you never want to outsource that or give that away, because if you don't have that ability to talk to your customers, how do you know what they want?
Exactly.
And if you don't know what they want, how can you reorganize your business or produce products or services to give them what they want? The example I think of this is retailers. And if I was a Procter & Gamble or Unilever's or something like that, I've got to work through a retailer, but it's the retailer that has the data on the customer, not Unilever.
Yeah.
It's the same with Amazon, right? I mean, Amazon is probably sharing some data with stores that sell on the Amazon platform. But at the end of the day, it's Amazon who knows what a customer wants, knows when to send him an email or her an email reminder. That last mile control they have is what, to a large degree, differentiates them.
And Amazon is very good actually not sharing the data also.
Yes.
I mean, it's one of the problems, of actually for some of the consumer product companies, or even the book publishers and otherwise, it's to basically work with them because they don't have full access to the data. And I'm trying, as you spoke, I try to think of examples where companies are successful in not owning the last mile. And the only ones I can think of, but these are very different businesses, are so like, large infrastructure companies where you own a network or you own a bridge or you own a road and you don't care.
Yes.
Whoever drives over, your bridge or your road or runs, whatever traffic runs over your infrastructure, you're fine and happy with it. But these businesses, always, I shouldn't say always, often will be relatively low margin because, as you described, you will struggle to differentiate, right? And if you can't differentiate, you can't charge an extra margin. So it's just very different businesses. Well, and maybe there's some examples of it, but it's not easy to make a surplus margin.
You can think of very simple examples of this. I mean, every day, almost every second day, I get an email from Netflix saying, you should watch this show because based on what you watched before. And I largely base my viewing habits based on that email. But then I'm also subscribed to other streaming platforms who just don't do that. Now, the question is, do they not do it because they are lazy and the department doesn't want to send an email? But the most likely answer is they may not actually know how to do it yet. And at the end of the day, I'm more likely to keep my Netflix subscription than another platform just because I don't know what they have on that platform.
Yeah. So think about Netflix, the business they've built, right? So they start, and they started like, in a very traditional way, but selling CDs and all that stuff. So what do they have now? They started with a relatively simple platform and value proposition.
Yes.
That was good. Then what they do is they get the data, right? So, and they accumulate more and more data, and it becomes self-reinforcing. But that data is then used, of course, to upsell, cross-sell.
Yeah.
And they upsell, cross-sell to you, and actually because it's tailored, you actually like it, so they reduce the churn.
Yes.
And then, not only are you buying more and you're being more satisfied, actually you spend more as well. And then because of that, they can actually charge a little bit more. So the ARPU, the average revenue per user, actually goes up.
Yes.
Now with that money, they can then invest in branding. So they then actually create like further barriers to entry because of the extra premium and the extra money they make. They can create a great brand, right? And basically promote it. In other words, they get more subscribers. Now they gain scale. That scale they can then use not just to buy content, but actually create and produce their own content, which then differentiates further. So now on top of that, they actually start hiring their own analytics people. We actually get even better at the upselling, cross-selling, churn reduction part. And it's not like 5 or 10 or 15 of them. It's like hundreds of great analytics people who actually use this data. And then on top of that, they start growing at exponential rates and start making more money. So anybody who becomes a competitor or creates better algorithms, but good algorithms, they can basically buy and suck up. And now you've got a great value proposition, a great platform, a great data, a great brand, the best people, deep pockets, an acquisition engine where it becomes self-fulfilling and like self-reinforcing. It's just going to be really, really difficult for anyone to compete with a platform play like Netflix because you create so many barriers to entry that it's almost impossible to compete with them. And it's all, it's all reinforcing, and they've just added more and more proprietary stuff, differentiating stuff, so to their ecosystem. And although they are, on these AWS data centers, they pick more and more things, including content creation.
Yes.
So to differentiate. And if you saw, but at the Oscars, I think it was 2025 of the Oscar nominations were actually Netflix productions, I think. So
it's scary.
Really changing that industry as well.
Well, think about this, right? If you want to compete with Netflix, you've got to figure out a very clever way to do it. But it seems like everyone wants to follow the same strategy of just putting in a lot of high-profile shows, and they hope that will buy them enough time to build the next capability and then build the next capability. But everyone seems to be following a very similar strategy to compete with them.
Yes.
It's about more and more shows. But I want to change the direction a little bit, Jen, something quite obvious, but I want to bring it up because I don't think people think about this. We talked about the last mile and how important it is to control that last mile. But I want to dumb it down a little bit here because when we talk about the last mile, I think the starting point is you have to have the contact details for your customers, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you don't have the contact details for your customers, how do you communicate with them to control that last mile?
Correct.
So, the other day I don't go shopping often, but I happened to be in a mall. And it always surprised me when you walk into a retailer, they don't really make a big effort to get your contact details. I walk in, walk out, but they don't know who I am. And I always wonder whether companies are so focused on building up digital capabilities that they miss that very important point of knowing who a customer is and a potential customer and being able to communicate with them and potentially show them something they want to buy to keep them in your business.
Yes.
And it's common, but it's very common in retail, but you see it in many different industries whereby you arrive somewhere and no one has your contact details. Or if they take your contact details, you get one email from them in a year, but they don't use that access to you as a way to build loyalty, trust, and basically take more money from you, right?
Yes.
And I do feel a lot of companies miss that.
Yes. No, I couldn't agree more. And the problem is, and this comes back to the last mile, is that many of the retailers and the frontline people are not at all incented.
Yes.
Not at all incented. It's like to capture this data. I mean, if you're a frontline salesperson, why the hell would you ask somebody for their email address unless you're incented to do it? And therefore, what the best retailers do, and some of the especially London-based department store retailers are really good at this, they incent their store managers and their frontline staff to capture this data. So if you go to some of these London department stores,
yes,
and this is more extreme here in the UK than in some other geographies, but anywhere between 40, 50, up to 55% of revenues for some of these department stores, also because some of them have a large international clientele, is online sales. And this is because they do the upselling, cross-selling part really, really well, and they create loyalty programs and customer databases that they very actively manage. And the way they structure it is that any one of these stores gets the benefits not based on what's actually sold in the store, but for the customers which fall into their natural area, so people that they signed up. And therefore, you change the incentives around. So any department store tries to be the first one to sign on a customer onto the database, because they will get the benefit for all the future revenues of these customers. So suddenly, you don't want anybody to slip away. Yeah. Because you are the one. This is your customer on a store level, but also on an individual, sales agent level. So you basically begin to own that customer, and you line the interest more than used to be the case before. And again, some of the if you look, and these are not necessarily people that I or our firm serves, but if you look at Harrods or Liberty or some of these high-end department stores, they are really sophisticated in these types of areas.
Yes, I mean, I do agree. Some are better, most are not very good. But let's shift gears a little bit, right? Let's talk about the investment around digitizing. I can imagine, I know this for a fact because I was reading the Financial Times today, and there was an article about lowering German productivity as German companies, particularly in automotive, need to reskill and reinvest to compete in electric and build the software capabilities for the new economy in automotive. And then alongside that piece, there was one about lowered German productivity. So one of the things I want to talk about here is if you make these investments, you're ultimately going to be seeing a drop in productivity in the short term because your input costs are going up, you're hiring people, you're buying companies and so on, and it's going to take you time to figure out how to get the return from your investment. What I want to talk about is how do the best executives manage expectations with shareholders and so on as they need to make that investment and see through the ramp up? Yeah.
So a couple of points that you said, and I agree with. So the investments are very meaningful. Once you get going and you really on an enterprise-wide level, attempt to digitize your business across all functions and all kinds of business units. And again, if you're Volkswagen, a big bank, a telco, insurance company, a retailer, these transformations over a 2, 3, 4 year period. I mean, they run in the tens of millions of euros. Sometimes, a good chunk above 100 million euros, and in some cases even a couple of 100 million euros. So these are very meaningful investments. This is not a normal little project that you run on the side. So the investments are very meaningful. The second thing which you said is they don't pay back immediately, which is also true. So you can structure them in ways that they become, if everything works well, they can be self-financing quickly. And you can always start stuff in the beginning. So that is self-financing in the first 3, 6, 9 months as a proof of concept. But as you then scale up, there will be a period, in most cases, I would say, depending on the nature of your business, but there will be a period when you go from a couple of pilots, handful of pilots, which you can maybe pay back themselves, But when you scale up, from a couple of pilots to an enterprise-wide transformation, but you're not running at full scale and full speed yet, there is a period where there may be a cash drain. And that, of course, is really tricky for a CEO or senior executive team.
Yeah.
So to manage through that period, because they have to manage quarterly earnings, and they, and they have to promise something,
yes,
which will come. So there's this difficult period, and again, this is why many people who start these digital transformations are typically early in their career, in the CEO careers or senior executive careers, rather than midway through at the end, because there will be a certain period of time when it doesn't look so good, and you don't want that to happen at the end of your career. You want it to happen somewhere midway. So I think one of the things that really good CEOs or senior executives do is to do it early in their career rather than towards the middle or the end. So time it properly, I think, is one big success factor. The second thing is, I think it was what Branston said, and I think he meant it more towards the internal organization. But communication is a really important part of these transformations, and it's communication internally towards the staff, because their roles will change, how they work will change, their minds and behaviors needs to change. But it's also communication to the fellow senior executives. It's communication aligned with an agenda. But importantly, it's also communication to the board and to external investors.
Yes.
So, and if you remember from the book, we said there's a couple of component elements to think about. And one of them is to take a little bit of time.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is about pace and acceleration and scaling up and secure sustainability to capability building. But what we're all saying is move a little bit more slowly to move faster. And the moving slowly bit is to really think things through up front in a structured way. So to figure out your point from the beginning, how are we going to differentiate it? So what is what are the things, if you're Netflix, is it analytics, what is it? So what are the things where we said we'll truly differentiate, and therefore we start with these things. We don't go enterprise-wide immediately, but we start with the things that are going to drive most value in the short term. So set the agenda and then communicate that agenda to your within the executive team, to your organization, but also to your shareholder. And linked to that strategy and the agenda, there needs to be some level of a business plan, right? So with economics attached to it, because the investments are so large.
Yes.
In some cases, again, in the more than 100 million, 150, 200 million range, that, no board will just sit and wait and see you invest that kind of money without a clear business plan and some payback curve. So that again is really important. So to create the strategy, create the integrated architecture of a program, and then an execution plan so that when which type of returns come, and then communicate that to all the various stakeholders.
And as you were saying that, I was thinking of the CEO of Disney when he made the decision that Disney would go all in on streaming. I think he spoke to the board, or somehow he signaled to the board that he wants to have his tenure extended to see through that transition. So when we talk about a company being committed, we really mean is that individual being committed, right? Mm-hmm. Is the CEO committed to see this through, or is he going to be honest with himself or herself and say, actually, now's the time for me to go, and someone who is willing to see through this 4 or 5 year transition needs to take over? You probably know this better than I do because you're currently working with a lot of clients, but there's a lot of companies going through this transition. And at a certain point, it comes down to an honest appraisal from the CEO of whether he or she wants to commit to this for 4 to 5 years. Because it's a big thing, right? 4 to 5 years is a long time.
I agree. And the other thing is also on a personal level. It in some cases, what took you to become CEO is not the same things that actually allow you to drive a great digital transformation. I serve a few very strong leaders, real silverback type CEOs. And some, in all honesty, will never change, right? And so what brought them there was strong decision making, sitting at the end of the table, seeing business cases, grasping these business cases faster than anybody else, having a good sense for what's the next trend in respective industry, reallocating resources, and just leading with very, strong direction and assertiveness an organization into a new direction or into a direction with full force. Digital is different. I mean, so like digital by definition is based on relatively autonomous, self-governing groups, and it's not 3 or 4 of these groups. In larger organizations, you will have several dozen tribes, and within each tribe you have like a dozen squads. So a squad is, 10, 15 people. A tribe can be 100, 150 people, and in large organizations with tens of thousands of people, you've got many, many of those. So if you're a CEO, how do you manage something like that?
Yes.
So your control over a squad or tribe, in all honesty, is limited.
Yeah.
Right. So it's quite uncomfortable. So if you're a software company, if you are, and I don't like how Sajid Nadella runs it, but say you launch a new version of Word.
Yeah.
And you've got a tribe that works on that. And you've got a product owner who launches this new version of Word. So your level of control of the actual design and the development and the engineering, maybe he's different, he's a genius, so maybe he's different. But for most normal mortal CEOs who've got dozens of these tribes and many, many of these squads, so the ability to go in and influence what these people actually do is quite limited. And therefore the role that you play becomes different. And it's more the conductor of an orchestra. It's more the cheerleader. I'm trivializing a bit too much now, but the sparring partner, the thought partner, the problem-solving partners. When you go in and actually spend time with these units, it's quite different. It's like sitting in a boardroom at the end of the table and it's like seeing business cases and it's like saying left, right, center. The way you lead is quite different. And some are ready for it and others are not.
Well, I don't think you're trivializing it. I think that is 100% correct. I mean, if you run a large organization, you can't do everything. You have to figure out how do you get your teams to want to do something that's important for the company. And sometimes that's cheerleading. Other times it's coaching an executive. It's almost as if you're managing an orchestra, right? And the way you get each piece of the ensemble to be its best is going to be different. And then let's just tie this back to something you said at the beginning, because we started off talking about a graveyard for digital stars. I'm going to hazard a guess here, but I'm going to think that the way the CEO communicates, or the way the leadership team communicates about their desire, fortitude, commitment to going digital is going to play a very big role in whether you can attract these digital stars to seed your organization. I would say maybe it's the biggest role, right?
I agree.
If I'm just standing up there as a CEO of a company and I'm disparaging digital companies because I don't think that's good for my company, why would someone who's a star in an industry quit his job to come to my business where he thinks the CEO doesn't care about his agenda?
Yeah, I think so. The communication that it's important and standing on the soapbox and saying it, I think is really important. There's a couple of other things that the CEO can do that are really, really important to not create these graveyards, but becomes like a magnet for these superstar talents. And some of it again is easier than some of the other things. But what's important for that talent to, at least for a period of time, so to want to be part of your organization. Yeah. It's like a couple of things. So just the way, and I may get a bit too technical here, but the way you structure your IT architecture is actually quite important. So some of the best developers, they like to program in open source. They like to create a brand for themselves and like to share their software with others. So how you build a stack.
Yes.
Whether you've got off-the-shelf software or you allow them to program in open source and use, and collaborate with other people inside and outside of your own organization. Just the openness of the architecture is quite important for these people. The second thing is, what I spoke a bit about before, is to work with other great people that you want to be on a team with. It's like when you're a good football player, it's much more fun to play for Barcelona, Real Madrid, and you will become better yourself, especially if you're a young player, and playing it all and playing with these team members. And engineers and developers and that type of talent, they want to be working with the best of the best. And again, the best attract other really good people and the next generation talent. And the third thing, I know this again is a little bit trivial, but many environments. So the working environment, many people have spoken about that. And it's not just the lava lamps and beanie hats and stuff like that, but it is, the working environment does matter. And if you go into some companies, it's just not inspiring.
Yes.
It's just not a fun environment to work within, and it just sends all the wrong signals, as you start. And again, just like creating environments. And I worked with a telco in Scandinavia that had facilities that were not great, but they did have a warehouse. We had, all their Cisco servers and their mobile infrastructure equipment. So we ripped out all that stuff. And the CEO was standing on one of these ramps where you look all over the warehouse. And he said, one day I want this whole warehouse to be filled with agile tribes and squads. And as we moved along, and this is I think 6-7 years ago, something like that, and today the warehouse is full, but we basically moved more and more of the core business into this warehouse. And just the physicality of it, it's like seeing how, you move from the old to the new into this cool new environment. And of course, over time, then more and more people want to move from the old to the new. That made a huge difference to us. And then, of course, the role modeling of the senior executives to not just in wording and communication, but also through physical action and being there and advocating it makes a huge difference.
So if I'm hearing you correctly here, none of these principles are that complex or some highly guarded secret. They're fairly well-known principles, right? Mm-hmm. So what will determine whether a company or an entity is successful in making this transition or being better if they've already made this transition is not whether they have this checklist, but their commitment to figuring out what works for them and making sure they see it through. Mm-hmm. Because it's not as if you read the book, you're going to find out something you've never heard before. If you're a leader of a large organization, you've seen it before, but the book reframes it and makes you understand how you need to think about it. Yes. Which is, brings me back to when I first read the book. I liked it a lot because I felt it wasn't technical. I felt it operated at a principle level. So that if I'm a busy executive, I don't really have to get into the details. I can think about this at a principle level and work with my leadership team to understand how we can implement this. Was that the intention for the book, to write it at that level?
Yeah. Let me comment before I get into the book. Just comment a bit on the transformation and why this is hard, although conceptually
it is hard. Yes,
not that hard. So I mean, you absolutely conceptually none of the stuff we've been talking about is rocket science. Right?
But that's what makes it hard, because it's known, but companies don't do it, right?
Yeah. So the thing is, we probably talked about 15, 20 different small things, right? So if you didn't quite figure out, how to differentiate, then all you do will just be what everybody else does. If you didn't quite figure out, how to build your IT architecture and what within the architecture to differentiate and actually bringing people into the organization to differentiate, it won't quite work. If you don't attract, some of the best talent, then attract other good talents to create in a sustainable way that differentiation, it won't quite work.
Yes.
So if the CEO is one of these old silverbacks who won't change, then it won't quite work. If you can't create, the cross-functional teams, the agile tribes and squads, or you create them, but you can't scale them because they don't quite fit into an overarching organization operating model. So you just do them 3, 4, 5 of them, but then it doesn't fit with the rest of the organization. I don't know how to scale it up. It won't quite work. So there's so many different things, each of which looks like a 0, 1. So if any one of them is 0, it's all multiplicative.
Yes.
If one of them is 0, you don't have the leader, or you don't have the org structure, or you don't have the people. Either one of those is 0, the whole thing falls through.
Yes.
So you need to be on some level of capability on all of them. And then of course, you can't work on all 15, 20 things in parallel.
Yes.
So you need to work on the stuff that really matters at any point in time.
Critical
you filled a gap.
Yeah.
There's another gap. And there's another gap, and that takes time, So that then takes you 3, 4, 5 years, and it takes you these $100, $150, $200 million. And do you then see it through? And that's what makes this hard.
Yes, and I think what makes it harder is that we've been talking about a company, but while the company is responding, their competitors are doing other things.
Exactly.
And you may have the world's greatest plan, but it's rendered moot by something a competitor does.
Yes. So it's a moving target. Then on top, whenever you did something, right? So say you did design your strategy or your org and operating model, or you figured out the capability map. It's a moving feat because your competitors are changing, your customers are changing. So you have to constantly adapt, learn, adjust. So while you always need to have these things in place, you need to always adjust and tweak them.
Yeah, I mean,
so that's.
No, continue.
Go ahead. That's what makes this difficult. and why I think it's like 70% or more than 70% of these transformations fail. And while when you look, it's really hard to find these great, digital transformation stories where somebody was an old incumbent and today is like a great digital leader. And you end up with this scenario that you described in the beginning, with these graveyards of people who tried, but you see the dead bodies in the graveyard.
Yeah, I mean, a good way to think about this, I'm sure you do that anyway with your clients, is that while we use the word digital and digital economy, this is about taking a bet on where the future is going to be. And taking any bet on where the future is going to be difficult. So while we talk digital, it's really about an executive coming together with his leadership team and saying, look, in the next 5 years, this is where we think the industry is going. This is where we think the technology is going, and this is where we want to play in the value chain with these products, with these customers. And it's hard to make those decisions.
Yes. And the thing is, you have to be, so that's another thing which we uncovered, which I know it's controversial or not, but you have to be first with something.
Yeah. Yes. You mentioned that in the book, and I like that.
Some offering, some analytics, some segment that you go after. You have to be first. We always talk about like fast followers is a fine strategy. Now, fast follower is not a fine strategy anymore, and that's one of the learnings. So just sitting still and waiting and following is not an option anymore because the environment is changing so fast. And, ask us, is that really true? You've got Moore's law, of course, like where everything, the processing capacity of a computer chip doubles every 2 years. But it's true for almost everything. If you take the development in, whether it's sensors, the cost of a sensor has gone from tens of thousands to a couple of hundred. If you take industrial robotics, 500,000, you can buy them today for 10, 15,000.
Yes.
If you take the sequencing of the human genome, of the DNA, it used to cost $10 million. You can buy it today off the shelf for a couple of $100. If you take solar panels, if you take almost any aspect, 3D printing a 3D printer used to cost $40,000. You can buy it for a couple of $100 today. So in every single aspect, just the change is exponential. It's not 10, 15, 20%. It's like hundreds, in some cases thousands. Yes. Just the pace of change is so fast. So if you try to follow, you will always be behind. Yeah. And therefore, you just have to move,
Well, I remember 2 years ago, the CEO of Volkswagen said that anything Tesla can do, we can do better. And I think 2 days ago, Tesla overtook Volkswagen in market capitalization. I mean, they were first before everyone else. They have problems, yes, but they seem to be getting it right. But it's what you say, because for a very long time, the industry almost evangelized a fast follower model. But what you're saying is that because of the pace of innovation, if you come from behind, it's really hard to leapfrog the incumbent. So there are times when fast follower works, but generally you want to be there first in some way.
Yes, on something. You have to pick what you're going to be first on, and it can be a product, can be a service, can be a second. But you need to be different on something. Otherwise you'll struggle.
And the reason for that is. And the reason for that is because it takes time to learn about the industry. So it's a learning curve effect. You want to start early.
Yes. No, exactly. And if you're out there, the best way to learn is to be out there and trial things.
Yes.
Adapt and learn. And if you're always one step behind, somebody else will always have these learnings first. So I think you really, really, you have to move at pace and at scale and think in ways that make whatever you do sustainable, and not just on a pilot basis, but ideally, if not enterprise-wide, then on a large enough scale, so to make it sustainable in the company over time.
And when you say learn, you're basically using a euphemism for fail, right? Fail a little, learn a little.
Yeah, so that's the other thing we tested. So of the top 10% of the companies that grew the fastest, we asked them to describe different characteristics within their culture. And culture, again, is the most important factor in driving performance, like revenue growth. Within culture, so the one thing that most companies pointed to was the willingness to fail and learn from the failure. You can't just fail and not learn, but like you have to accept to fail and then learn. That was the cultural characteristic which most differentiated the top 10 from the average company when it came to culture.
Peter, thank you so much. I know we're pressed for time, so I want to honor that commitment. I actually enjoyed this a lot. Getting up at 7:30 to do an interview is always fun, but this really was fun. So thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, the only other thing is, this idea of pace. Yes. And we adapted that to the actual book itself. Yes, so it's structured in 17 different chapters. And our friends from Amazon told us that only, less than 5% of the people, who buy a book, any best-selling book, read more than 7% of a book. So less than 5% of people who buy best-selling book read more than 7% of a book. So the way we wrote this book, you don't have to read the whole book. Yes. You can read each chapter based on the thing of these 15, 20 things, that is most relevant for you. So if you've got a culture challenge, read the culture section. If you've got an IT architect, read that section. So that's the way the book is designed. So we took a little bit of our own medicine, also keeping in mind that people are busy and have to get up at 7:30 in the morning to do these kinds of interviews. So you don't have that much time to read the whole book, but at least you can read the section of the chapter, which is most relevant for you. So that's the way the book is structured.
Well, I mean, I've read the book, and I think the other thing I would recommend to people if they read the book is if you're going to take anything out of that chapter, take out the main principle. Because if you list each of the principles, which is what I did from each of the chapters, and you can use it as almost a reference point. And I found that very useful because the book does reframe a lot of things. And we didn't get to all of it, but this idea about not being a graveyard for digital stars, well, it says something we already know. Just the way it's said, it makes you stand up and take notice. And that's one example of how you've reframed things. So I enjoyed it very much. I enjoyed this call. Thank you so much. Hopefully the weather and the economy improves in the UK.
I hope so too. Fingers crossed.
Take care. Ciao.
Thanks, Michael. Ta-ta.
And that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed doing the episode. Finally, I want you to remember that the only way to get access to our special offers, the only way to get our special pricing, and the only way to get samples of our content is to join the list on firmsconsulting.com. It's the only way also to get access to our unique advanced content that we make available to insiders. So if you want to get a sneak peek of things, test it out, see what's in there, this is the place to go. And finally, I want to thank you again for making us one of the largest podcast channels around the world for careers and for the 2 million downloads and counting.